The chamber was silent. Not the silence of respect, but the silence of inevitability. The kind that settles over a courtroom when the verdict is already written in the evidence, when the accused knows that denial has reached its expiration date, when history stops being written by the victors and starts being documented by the facts. Every seat was occupied, cameras positioned at angles designed to capture not just words, but the micro-expressions of collapse, the subtle body language of someone watching 3 decades of carefully constructed mythology crumble in real time. This wasn't political theater. This wasn't another congressional hearing that would fade into the news cycle within 48 hours. This was an accounting, a reckoning, the final chapter of a story that America had been told to accept but never quite believed. At the center of it all sat Hillary Rodham Clinton, former First Lady who had transformed that ceremonial role into a launching pad for personal ambition. Former United States Senator who had used that position as a stepping stone rather than a service. Former Secretary of State who had treated the nation's highest diplomatic office as a family business franchise. Two-time presidential candidate who had lost not once but twice, and in her losses had unleashed chaos, conspiracy, and institutional corruption on a scale that would take generations to fully comprehend and repair. She sat there now, back straight, hands folded on the table before her with that practiced composure that had carried her through scandals that would have destroyed lesser politicians. But composure is just a mask, and every mask eventually cracks when subjected to enough pressure, enough truth, enough documented evidence of systematic wrongdoing. Across from her, armed not with partisan talking points or political spin, but with documents, financial records, email transcripts, sworn testimony, and the kind of methodical preparation that separates prosecutors from performers, sat Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, a woman who had built her career not on name recognition or dynasty connections, but on actual legal victories in actual courtrooms where evidence mattered and lies had consequences. Her voice was steady, neither raised in theatrical outrage nor softened with false sympathy. It carried the tone of someone who had spent months, perhaps years, building a case so comprehensive that deflection would be impossible, so documented that denial would be absurd, so systematic that the only question remaining was not whether crimes had been committed, but how many and for how long. This wasn't performance art designed to generate sound bites for friendly media outlets. This wasn't theater crafted to energize a political base. This was the methodical dismantling of a political career, a family dynasty, and a corrupt system that had protected both for far too long. The American people watching from their homes, their offices, their phones during lunch breaks didn't yet know they were witnessing history, but they would, because what was about to unfold in that chamber would not be forgotten, could not be spun away, would not fade into the background noise of political controversy. It was the beginning of the end for Hillary Rodham Clinton, and everyone in that room could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm. Bondi didn't open with pleasantries or procedural formalities. She didn't waste time with the kind of diplomatic preamble that Washington insiders use to soften what comes next. Her first words were direct, precise, and devastating in their simplicity. "Madam Secretary," she began, the title carrying no deference, but rather the weight of irony, a reminder of power once held and now subject to scrutiny. "I'm not here to relitigate your political legacy. I'm not here to debate policy differences or ideological divides. I'm here to expose what that legacy tried to bury, to document what that power was used to conceal, and to ensure that the American people finally, after decades of obfuscation and institutional protection, see the full picture of who you are and what you've done." She paused, letting those words settle, letting the cameras capture Clinton's face as it registered that this would not be another friendly interview with a sympathetic journalist, not another softball congressional hearing where Democrats would run interference and Republicans would grandstand without real consequences. "Let's begin with the server," Bondi continued, and behind her the screen flickered to life, not with partisan graphics or emotional appeals, but with rows of documents. Email headers with official government classifications, subject lines that had been deleted from public view but recovered by forensic specialists, Timestamps that told a story of systematic concealment. You operated a private, unsecured email server while serving as the highest-ranking diplomat of the United States of America. You conducted official government business, including discussions of classified operations, intelligence assessments, and sensitive diplomatic negotiations, through a system housed in your personal residence in Chappaqua, New York. A system that was never authorized by State Department security protocols. A system that was never secured to government standards. A system that was specifically designed to evade federal record-keeping laws and Freedom of Information Act requests. Bondi's voice remained level, but her words built like a legal argument presented to a jury, each fact a brick in a wall that would eventually become insurmountable. And when that server became the subject of congressional investigation, when subpoenas were issued for those emails, when the American people demanded to know what their Secretary of State had been hiding, you didn't cooperate. You didn't comply. You didn't come clean. She clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline that would become one of the most damning visual aids in congressional hearing history. March 2, 2015. The New York Times breaks the story about your private server. March 4, 2015. The House Benghazi Committee issues a subpoena for all related emails. March 25 through March 31, 2015. Your team uses BleachBit software, specifically designed to permanently erase digital evidence beyond any possibility of forensic recovery, to delete 33,000 emails. The number hung in the air like an accusation that needed no elaboration. 33,000. Not a few dozen accidentally deleted messages. Not a handful of personal communications accidentally mixed with official business. 33,000 deliberate erasures. BleachBit, Bondi continued, her tone shifting slightly to emphasize the significance, is not a standard deletion tool. It's not what you use when you're cleaning up your inbox to free up storage space. It's military-grade digital destruction software used by people who need to ensure that deleted data can never, ever be recovered by any forensic method known to modern technology. It's what criminals use when they're destroying evidence. And that's exactly what you used to destroy 33,000 emails that were under congressional subpoena. She clicked again, and the screen showed photographs that had been leaked during the initial investigation. Smartphones with their screens shattered, circuit boards exposed, clearly destroyed with physical tools. And the physical devices, your staff destroyed them with hammers, literal hammers, smashing them to pieces to ensure that no data could ever be extracted, no messages could ever be recovered, no evidence of what you'd been doing could ever see daylight. Clinton sat motionless, her face a carefully maintained mask of composure that decades of political training had perfected. But Bondi wasn't looking for an emotional reaction. She was building a prosecutorial case, and the evidence spoke louder than any facial expression. This wasn't carelessness, Madam Secretary. This wasn't the actions of someone who made an innocent mistake and then tried to correct it. This was calculation. This was deliberate. This was the systematic destruction of evidence by someone who knew exactly what she was doing and exactly why it needed to be destroyed before investigators could examine it. Bondi pulled out a thick binder and opened it to a marked page. The deletion of 33,000 emails under congressional subpoena isn't a mistake. It's obstruction of justice. In any normal legal proceeding, in any case involving anyone without the last name Clinton, that alone would result in federal prosecution, conviction, and imprisonment. She looked directly at Clinton now, her gaze unwavering. But you're not anyone, are you? You're a Clinton. And that name has purchased protection for so long that you genuinely believed, you truly thought that the law simply didn't apply to you, that rules were for other people, that accountability was something that happened to those without your connections, your lawyers, your institutional backing. The words landed like hammer blows, methodical and precise. Hillary Clinton didn't lose control of her emails. She exercised control ruthlessly, systematically, and illegally. The American people didn't get the truth from their Secretary of State. They got a cover-up so brazen, so comprehensive, so protected by institutional power that it succeeded despite overwhelming evidence of criminal conduct. Bondi turned back to the screen. clicking through a series of documents that showed the FBI's own findings, carefully worded to avoid directly recommending prosecution, but nevertheless documenting systematic violations. This was the most powerful woman in Washington at the time, someone with access to the most sensitive intelligence in the world, someone entrusted with diplomatic secrets that could affect national security and international relations, and she was conducting that business on an unsecured private server while simultaneously destroying evidence of what she'd been saying and doing. And when caught, she didn't apologize. She didn't admit wrongdoing. She claimed it was about yoga schedules and wedding plans. The sarcasm in Bondi's voice was subtle but unmistakable. 33,000 emails about yoga and weddings. Emails so sensitive, so personal, so innocuous that they had to be permanently destroyed using military-grade deletion software and physical destruction of the devices they were stored on. She closed the binder with a decisive snap. The left didn't just ignore this, Madam Secretary. They praised your resilience. They celebrated your survival. They attacked anyone who dared to ask questions as engaged in a partisan witch hunt. Because to them, to the democratic establishment that had crowned you as inevitable, destruction of evidence isn't obstruction. It's survival. Lying to Congress isn't perjury. It's political strategy. And using the highest diplomatic office in the land as a personal email account while systematically destroying records isn't a crime. It's just Hillary being Hillary. Bondi's voice hardened. But the American people deserve better than that. They deserve a Secretary of State who follows the law. They deserve a presidential candidate who doesn't destroy evidence. They deserve leaders who believe that rules apply to everyone, not just to those without power and connections. Clinton finally spoke, her voice carrying that practiced tone of patient explanation that she'd perfected over decades of explaining away scandals. There was no classified material on those emails. That has been thoroughly investigated and established by multiple reviews. It was the defense her legal team had crafted, the talking point that friendly media had repeated endlessly, the claim that had been designed to end discussion rather than invite scrutiny. Bondi didn't even pause. She'd been waiting for exactly this response, had prepared for it, had documentation ready to demolish it completely. No, Madam Secretary. What's been established is that you were never prosecuted. There's a significant difference between innocence and immunity. She pulled out another document, this one marked with official FBI letterhead. The FBI confirmed that at least 110 emails transmitted through your private server contained classified information at the time they were sent. Not retroactively classified, as you've repeatedly claimed, classified at the time. 8 of those emails contained information classified at the top secret level, the highest classification level, information whose unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. She looked up from the document, her eyes meeting Clinton's directly. And you deleted them, without oversight, without authorization, without any accountability whatsoever. You destroyed classified government records that were under congressional subpoena, and the only reason you're sitting here as a witness instead of a defendant is because of who you are and what you represent to the institutional power structure that has protected you for 3 decades. Bondi let that accusation hang in the air for a moment, giving it weight, letting it sink in not just for Clinton but for everyone watching. If anyone else had done what you did, they would be in federal prison right now. But you're not anyone, you're a Clinton. And that's the story of your entire career, isn't it? Power without prosecution, influence without accountability, a legacy written in exemptions, special treatment, and institutional protection. She turned back to her materials, pulling out yet another folder. You didn't serve the system, Madam Secretary. You mastered how to bend it, how to manipulate it, how to use it for your benefit while avoiding its consequences. And the Democratic Party, rather than holding you accountable, rather than demanding that you follow the same rules as everyone else, they didn't distance themselves. They nominated you for president. They made you their standard bearer. They told America that this was leadership. Bondi's voice carried a note of disgust that broke through her professional composure. This scandal wasn't just about emails, Madam Secretary. It was about a government official who believed, and was proven right to believe, that the law didn't apply to her, that rules were suggestions, that accountability was optional, And that belief, that arrogance, that sense of untouchable privilege, that's what we're really examining here today. She clicked to another slide, this one showing an email that had been recovered despite the deletion attempts. Let's read one of those deleted emails that investigators managed to recover from other government servers where it had been transmitted. Subject line: Arms Deal Urgent Timeline. From hrc@clintonmail.com. To two senior State Department staff members whose names I'll redact for their protection. Date: April 3, 2011. Bondi read the email slowly, clearly, letting each word register. The content discussed weapons sales to Middle Eastern governments, countries that were simultaneously making massive donations to the Clinton Foundation, countries whose human rights records were abysmal but whose checkbooks were open. An arms deal discussed through an unsecured private server during an active Arab Spring uprising, during a period of massive geopolitical instability, while the Clinton Foundation was receiving tens of millions of dollars in donations from the same governments involved in these weapons purchases. She looked up at Clinton. "Explain that, Madam Secretary. Explain how that's just about yoga schedules and wedding plans." Clinton's jaw tightened, the first visible crack in her carefully maintained composure. That email was taken out of context. The full picture of State Department operations during that period shows that arms sales decisions were made through proper channels with appropriate review. It was a deflection, a pivot to process rather than substance, the kind of bureaucratic language designed to obscure rather than illuminate. Bondi shook her head slowly. "The context, Madam Secretary, is that your office systematically mixed diplomacy with dollars, that your official duties as Secretary of State overlapped with your family's fundraising operation to a degree that made it impossible to distinguish between public service and private enrichment. That when investigators started connecting those dots, when journalists began following the money, when the pattern became undeniable, you erased the map. You destroyed the evidence. You made it impossible to fully investigate the extent of what you'd been doing, because you deleted 33,000 pieces of potential evidence." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. "This is the Clinton playbook that we've seen for 30 years. When the evidence points toward corruption, shift the narrative. Talk about process instead of substance. Claim context that you refuse to provide because you've destroyed the documents that would show that context. When the emails suggest pay for play, call them routine diplomatic communications. When the foundation donations track perfectly with State Department decisions, call it coincidence. And when the media starts to dig, when investigators get close, feed them a new distraction, create a new controversy, attack the investigators' motives, question their partisanship. Do anything except answer the actual questions about what you did and why you did it." Bondi's voice rose slightly, not in anger but in emphasis. "The truth is simple, even if the cover-up is complex. Hillary Clinton used her position as Secretary of State to enrich herself and her family. She used government power to benefit Clinton Foundation donors. She mixed official duties with personal fundraising in ways that violated not just ethics rules but federal law. And when she got caught, she destroyed the evidence and dared anyone to prove it." She turned to face Clinton fully now, no longer referencing documents or screens but speaking directly, person to person, prosecutor to accused. "You shielded yourself with lawyers and legal technicalities and institutional protection. You hid behind the complexity of email systems and classification procedures and bureaucratic protocols. But underneath all that complexity, underneath all those legal maneuvers and technical arguments, the basic facts are simple and damning. You broke the rules. You destroyed evidence. You lied about it repeatedly. And you did it all because you believed you could get away with it, because you'd always gotten away with it before." Bondi picked up a single piece of paper, holding it up for the cameras. "This is a legal memo prepared by career prosecutors at the Department of Justice who reviewed your email case. These are prosecutors with decades of experience, people who have no political agenda, who simply looked at the evidence and applied the law. Their conclusion, which was never made public until subpoenaed by this committee, was clear. Probable cause existed to prosecute for multiple violations of federal law related to the handling of classified information, and the destruction of government records. She placed the memo carefully on the table in front of her. But that prosecution was never brought, not because the evidence was insufficient, not because the law didn't apply, but because you're Hillary Clinton and there's a two-tier justice system in this country, one for people with power, connections, and the right last name, and another for everyone else. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the sounds of camera shutters and shuffling papers had ceased. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing something significant, a moment when carefully maintained fictions were being stripped away and replaced with documented facts. Clinton sat rigid, her carefully practiced composure barely masking what must have been a riot of calculations running through her mind. Which parts could be denied, which could be justified, which required another layer of deflection. How to survive this moment without admitting anything that could be used against her. But Bondi wasn't finished. The emails were just the opening act, the establishing shot that set the stage for what was to come. Because as damning as the server scandal was, as clear as the evidence of obstruction had become, it was almost quaint compared to what came next. The emails showed corruption and cover-up. What came next would show something worse: fatal negligence, calculated deception, and the callous sacrifice of American lives for political convenience. Bondi's expression shifted, hardening into something colder, more personal. When she spoke again, her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "Madam Secretary," she said, each word precisely articulated, "on September 11, 2012, 4 Americans died in Benghazi, Libya." She clicked to the next slide and 4 faces appeared on the screen. Professional photographs, the kind taken for official credentials and family mantles. Ambassador Christopher Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, former Navy SEALs Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods. 4 men who had served their country, who had been sent to one of the most dangerous postings in the world, who had begged for security and been denied, who had died horrible deaths while waiting for help that never came. These 4 men, Bondi continued, her voice thick with emotion that was clearly genuine and deeply felt, died on your watch. They died after sending over 600 requests for additional security that your department ignored or denied. They died in a location that every intelligence assessment had identified as dangerous and getting more dangerous by the day. They died while American military assets that could have helped them were ordered to stand down. They died because the Secretary of State, the person ultimately responsible for the safety of American diplomatic personnel worldwide, failed to protect them. She let those words sit for a moment, let the weight of them press down on the chamber. Benghazi was not a battlefield casualty in an active war zone where such losses, while tragic, are understood risks. It was a massacre, a preventable massacre. Americans died not because of enemy action that couldn't be predicted or prevented, but because their own government, their own State Department, the official who was supposed to protect them, failed them completely. Bondi's voice grew harder. And what makes it worse? What elevates this from tragic failure to criminal negligence to deliberate deception is that it was preventable. Every step of the way, this tragedy could have been avoided. Warnings were issued. Danger was documented. Requests for help were submitted through proper channels. And at every single turn, those warnings were ignored. Those requests were denied. Not by enemies overseas, but by bureaucrats in Washington who decided that security costs too much or risked drawing too much attention to a diplomatic post that was already controversial. She clicked through a series of documents, each one a security request from the Benghazi mission, each one stamped with dates that preceded the attack by weeks or months. Your department, Madam Secretary, was warned multiple times that the consulate in Benghazi was vulnerable to attack. The regional security officer sent cable after cable detailing deteriorating security conditions. Ambassador Stevens himself, the man you sent there, the man who died there, wrote personally about his concerns. Over 600 security requests were submitted from Libya in the months leading up to September 11, 2012. 600 documented pleas for help from Americans serving in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Bondi looked up from the documents, her eyes boring into Clinton. And you denied them. Not all of them personally, perhaps, but they were denied by your department under your leadership, with your knowledge of the security situation. Every single request for additional security personnel, for better equipment, for hardened facilities, every request was either denied outright or lost in bureaucratic delays until it became meaningless. Clinton's prepared response came quickly, the words clearly rehearsed with her legal team in anticipation of exactly this line of questioning. Security assessments and resource allocation decisions were made by the appropriate regional security bureaus within the State Department. Those professionals evaluated threats and allocated resources based on global priorities and available personnel. It was classic Clinton deflection, technically accurate in the narrowest sense, but fundamentally dishonest in its attempt to distance herself from decisions that bore her ultimate responsibility. Bondi's response was swift and cutting. "And those bureaus answered to you, Madam Secretary. This is how you've operated throughout your entire career. You build a fortress of subordinates and bureaucratic layers, then claim distance from decisions and consequences when things go wrong. You create plausible deniability through organizational complexity. But the role of Secretary of State isn't decorative. It comes with responsibility. Command responsibility. When Americans under your authority request security and don't receive it, when they die because of that failure, the responsibility flows upward to you." She pulled out another document, this one showing an organizational chart of the State Department during Clinton's tenure. "You were briefed on Libya repeatedly. You received intelligence updates. You knew that the security situation was deteriorating. Ambassador Stevens reported directly to senior officials in your immediate office. The idea that you were somehow unaware of the danger, that security requests never reached your level of awareness, is simply not credible given the documentary evidence." Bondi's voice took on a prosecutorial intensity. "But even if we accept, for the sake of argument, that you were somehow insulated from 600 security requests, even if we pretend that you were unaware of the warnings that were flooding into the State Department from Libya, what happened after the attack is even more damning than what happened before it." She clicked to a new slide, and the screen showed a photograph that had become iconic in conservative media, but had been largely buried by mainstream outlets. Clinton standing at Andrews Air Force Base, greeting the flag-draped coffins of the 4 Americans killed in Benghazi, speaking to their families about what had caused the attack. "You told the families of the fallen that a YouTube video caused the riot that killed their loved ones," Bondi said, her voice heavy with disgust. "You stood over their caskets and told grieving parents, told a grieving widow, that a spontaneous protest over an anti-Muslim video had spiraled out of control, that their sons and husbands had died because of religious offense taken to an obscure internet video that almost nobody had seen." She clicked again, and the screen split to show Clinton's public statements alongside an email she had sent that same night. "But that same evening, just hours after the attack, you sent an email to your daughter Chelsea using your private server, and in that email you wrote, and I'm quoting your exact words here, 2 of our officers were killed today in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. Not a protest, not a spontaneous riot, an Al-Qaeda-like group, a terrorist attack. You knew the truth within hours, probably within minutes given the intelligence flowing into the State Department Operations Center during the attack." Bondi let the comparison sit on the screen, the lie and the truth side by side, impossible to reconcile or explain away. "So let me ask you directly, Madam Secretary, and I want the American people to hear your answer. Why did you tell the truth privately to your daughter while lying publicly to the American people? Why did you tell grieving families that their loved ones died because of a video when you knew, absolutely knew, that it was a planned terrorist attack?" The silence stretched out, seconds feeling like minutes as Clinton calculated her response. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying less certainty than before. "We were working with limited and conflicting information in the immediate aftermath of the attack. Initial reports suggested protest activity, and we shared that information as it was available to us. As more intelligence came in, our understanding evolved." "No, Madam Secretary," Bondi's voice cracked like a whip. "You had the information from the beginning from people on the ground in real time. You knew it was a terrorist attack. Your email to Chelsea proves you knew. Emails to foreign leaders that have since been released prove you knew. But you chose the video narrative for public consumption. You made a deliberate choice to deceive the American people, to deceive grieving families about how their loved ones died. She clicked to another slide showing a timeline. And it wasn't just you. Within hours of the attack, you and others in the administration coordinated a comprehensive messaging strategy built on the video lie. Susan Rice was sent to 5 different Sunday morning talk shows to repeat the video story. President Obama referenced the video in his address to the United Nations. Spokespeople across the administration pushed the same false narrative. A filmmaker in California who had made the video was arrested on a probation violation and became the scapegoat for your failure. Bondi's voice rose with genuine anger now, the professional prosecutorial distance giving way to moral outrage. This wasn't confusion, Madam Secretary. This was deception. Calculated, deliberate, coordinated deception. And the reason is obvious to anyone willing to see it. An election was coming. You were planning to run for president. The Obama administration in which you served had built its foreign policy reputation on the claim that al-Qaeda was decimated and on the run. A major terrorist attack on American diplomatic facilities on the anniversary of September 11th, no less, didn't fit that narrative. It was politically inconvenient, so you lied. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table before her. 4 Americans died because you failed to protect them. That's bad enough. That's a dereliction of duty that should have ended your career. But then you lied about how they died. You lied to their families. You lied to the American people. You turned their deaths into a political narrative management problem rather than a national security crisis and a personal failure of leadership. And that, Madam Secretary, is unforgivable. Bondi pulled out a worn piece of paper, handling it with a reverence that suggested personal significance. This is a copy of one of Ambassador Stevens' final cables from Benghazi. He sent it less than a month before he was killed. I want to read part of it into the record. She read slowly, letting every word carry its full weight. The security situation in Benghazi remains fluid and unpredictable. Host government support is minimal. Threats against U.S. interests and personnel are credible and increasing. We cannot maintain a secure operational environment with current resources. Request immediate review of security posture and personnel levels. She looked up, her eyes glistening with what might have been tears or might have been fury. Ambassador Christopher Stevens, 1 month before his death, telling you in the clearest possible language that he was in danger and needed help. And what did your State Department send in response? A bureaucratic acknowledgement and no additional security. Not even a serious review of the security posture he'd specifically requested. In the private sector, Bondi continued, if a CEO ignored 600 warnings about a safety hazard and 4 employees died as a result, they would face criminal charges. Negligent homicide at minimum. They would be prosecuted, convicted, and imprisoned. But in Hillary Clinton's Washington, in the State Department, she ran like a personal fiefdom. Ignoring warnings and denying security requests didn't lead to prosecution. It led to a book deal, a Netflix documentary, and a presidential nomination. She clicked through photographs of the 4 men who died, not their official photos this time, but personal images. Stevens with his family, Smith with his children, Doherty and Woods in their Navy SEAL gear, young and strong and full of the kind of confidence that comes from elite military training. These weren't just names on a casualty list, Madam Secretary. These were fathers and sons and husbands. Sean Smith left behind a wife and 2 young children. Tyrone Woods had 3 sons. Glenn Doherty's mother still gives interviews begging for someone, anyone, to hold you accountable for her son's death. Ambassador Stevens' family has been more circumspect, but their grief is no less real. Bondi's voice dropped to just above a whisper, forcing everyone in the chamber to lean forward to hear. And for years, you called the demands for answers about Benghazi a partisan witch hunt. You acted offended that anyone would dare question your handling of the situation. You attacked the House committees investigating the attack. You dismissed the family's questions as politically motivated. You had your media allies run segments mocking those of us who refused to let this go as conspiracy theorists and obsessives. She stood up fully now, her voice returning to full strength. But we weren't conspiracy theorists. We were right. The security was inadequate. The requests were denied. The response during the attack was insufficient, and the cover-up afterward was comprehensive and deliberate. Every single thing we said about Benghazi has been proven true by the evidence that has slowly, painfully, been extracted from your department, despite your best efforts to conceal it. You want to know what the real witch hunt was, Madam Secretary? Bondi asked, her voice heavy with sarcasm. It was the coordinated effort by you and your allies to paint anyone asking questions about Benghazi as a partisan hack, to smear the families of the dead as being manipulated by Republicans, to turn a legitimate investigation into 4 American deaths into a political football that you could kick around for your advantage. That was the real witch hunt, and you led it. She clicked to a final slide about Benghazi, this one showing the ruins of the consulate compound, buildings burned and destroyed, the American flag nowhere to be seen. 4 Americans died in those buildings while waiting for help that never came, while military assets capable of mounting a rescue were told to stand down, while the Secretary of State was already crafting a false narrative about videos and protests instead of taking responsibility for the security failure that allowed the attack to succeed. Bondi gathered her papers about Benghazi, stacking them neatly. You weren't blindsided by this attack, Madam Secretary. You were briefed on the threats. You received the requests for security. You had months to prevent this tragedy and you failed. Then you had one chance to at least be honest about what happened and why, and you failed again. You chose political convenience over truth. You chose your career prospects over honoring the dead. And you've never, not once in the 12 years since that terrible night, taken actual responsibility for the failures that led to their deaths. The weight in the chamber had become almost physical. Even Clinton's most stalwart defenders on the committee sat silent, unable or unwilling to mount a defense against the documented timeline of failure and deception that Bondi had presented. The emails proved foreknowledge. The cables proved requests denied. The timeline proved the video story was a lie. There was no spin sophisticated enough to explain it all away. But Bondi wasn't finished. If the emails showed corruption and Benghazi showed deadly negligence, what came next would show something even more systematic: the transformation of government service into a personal enrichment operation, the use of a charitable foundation as a pay-to-play scheme, and the corruption of American foreign policy by foreign money flowing through an organization that bore her family name. Let's talk about the Clinton Foundation, Bondi said, and the temperature in the room somehow dropped even further. This was the scandal that connected everything else, the through line that explained the private server to keep Foundation business hidden from government records, the deleted emails to conceal the coordination between State Department and Foundation activities, and the systematic deception to maintain the fiction that her charity work and her government service were separate rather than inextricably and corruptly intertwined. The screen behind her changed again, now displaying the Clinton Foundation logo, those clean white letters on a blue background that had been so carefully crafted to project trustworthiness and philanthropic purpose. You've called the Clinton Foundation one of the most transparent charities in the world, Bondi said, her voice dripping with skepticism. You've held it up as your proudest achievement, as proof that you care about global issues and humanitarian causes. You've used it to rehabilitate your image after scandals and to build political networks around the world. She tapped her tablet, and the logo was replaced by financial documents, tax returns, donor lists. So let's examine this transparent charity. Let's see what that transparency reveals when we actually look closely at where the money came from, where it went, and what donors received in return for their generosity. The documents on the screen told a story that was damning in its clarity. Between 2009 and 2013, the years you served as Secretary of State, the Clinton Foundation accepted over $145 million in donations from foreign governments, international corporations, and wealthy individuals with business before the State Department you controlled. Bondi clicked through a list of donors, each one more troubling than the last. Saudi Arabia donated $32 million during your tenure as Secretary of State. Qatar gave $12 million. The United Arab Emirates contributed $8 million. Morocco, Oman, Algeria, Kuwait all governments with questionable human rights records, and all seeking favorable treatment from the United States government, all making massive donations to your family foundation, while you were in a position to grant them that favorable treatment. She looked up from her tablet. And in that same period, you personally approved billions of dollars in arms sales to these same countries. Saudi Arabia alone received weapons deals worth over $60 billion that required your sign-off as Secretary of State. They gave you $32 million. You gave them $60 billion in weapons. Is that transparency, Madam Secretary? Or is that just very expensive influence peddling? Clinton's response was immediate and clearly prepared, the talking point honed through years of defending the foundation against similar accusations. The Clinton Foundation's operations and my duties as Secretary of State were completely separate. I recused myself from any decisions involving foundation donors. The weapon sales you reference were part of long-standing relationships between the United States and allied governments in a strategically vital region. Every word was technically deniable, carefully constructed to create distance between her official actions and her family's fundraising. But Bondi had spent months preparing for exactly this defense, and she had documents that demolished the firewall Clinton claimed existed between her government work and her family charity. No, Madam Secretary, they were not separate. They were synchronized, coordinated, systematically intertwined in ways that made it impossible to distinguish between diplomacy and fundraising, between foreign policy and family business. She pulled out a thick binder filled with emails that had been recovered from the server or obtained from other government officials Clinton had corresponded with. These are emails between your closest aide, Huma Abedin, who simultaneously worked for both the State Department and the Clinton Foundation, and foundation executives. Emails discussing donor meetings, foundation events, and requests from foundation donors for access to you as Secretary of State. Bondi read from one email, her voice carrying the weight of documented proof. Subject: Meeting request from Bahrain Crown Prince. Huma Abedin writes to you, CP of Bahrain and tomorrow, good friend of ours. You respond, if he's our friend, I'll see him. She replies, he's a foundation donor. You then met with the Crown Prince, and 2 months later you approved a major arms sale to Bahrain despite that country's well-documented human rights abuses during the Arab Spring protests. She looked up. That's not separation of duties, Madam Secretary. That's pay-to-play in black and white. A foreign government official gets preferential access to the Secretary of State specifically because he's a foundation donor, and shortly afterward his country gets approved for weapons purchases. How is that not corruption? The evidence kept mounting, email after email showing the same pattern. Foundation donors getting special meetings. Foundation supporters receiving favorable decisions. Countries that contributed to the Clinton Foundation receiving expedited approvals for deals that had been languishing in bureaucratic review. This wasn't diplomacy, Bondi said, her voice hard with conviction. This was commerce. The Clinton Foundation acted as a shadow influence operation, collecting money from foreign governments and international corporations while Hillary Clinton sat atop the most powerful diplomatic office in the world, able to grant favors that those donors wanted. And somehow, mysteriously, those donors kept getting what they wanted. She clicked to a new section of documents. But it gets worse, because it wasn't just access they were buying. Let's talk about Uranium-1. The name hung in the air like an indictment. Uranium-1 had been the subject of conspiracy theories and partisan battles for years, with Clinton defenders dismissing concerns as right-wing fantasy and Clinton critics insisting it proved systematic corruption. Bondi was about to show that the critics had been right all along. Uranium-1 was a Canadian company that controlled approximately 20% of American uranium production capacity. Bondi explained for those unfamiliar with the details. In 2010, Russian state-owned atomic energy company Rosatom sought to acquire Uranium-1, which would give Russia control over a significant portion of American uranium resources. That acquisition required approval from multiple U.S. government agencies, including the State Department, because it involved strategic natural resources with national security implications. She pulled up the approval timeline alongside a list of Clinton Foundation donations. The State Department under your leadership approved that sale. Russia got control of 20% of American uranium capacity. And in the months before and after that approval, the Clinton Foundation received $2.35 million in donations from Uranium One Chairman Ian Telfer, donations that were never disclosed despite your pledge to disclose all foundation donors while serving as Secretary of State. Clinton's face had gone rigid, her jaw clenched so tight that muscles stood out in her neck. This was the accusation that had always been the most dangerous, the one that combined foreign money, strategic resources, and undisclosed donations into a package that even her most loyal defenders struggled to explain away. That accusation has been thoroughly debunked by multiple fact-checkers and investigative journalists, Clinton said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. She knew the ground was treacherous here. Bondi smiled, but it was not a warm expression. Debunked by whom, Madam Secretary? By media outlets that endorsed you for president. By fact-checkers employed by organizations that received funding from, coincidentally, the Clinton Foundation. Let's be clear about what debunked means in Clinton world. It means that friendly journalists wrote articles saying your critics were wrong, articles that your press team then cited as proof of innocence. It doesn't mean the donations didn't happen. It doesn't mean you didn't approve the deal. It doesn't mean the donations weren't concealed in violation of your ethics agreement. All of those facts remain true regardless of how many opinion pieces claim otherwise. She laid out the documents in chronological order, creating a timeline that was impossible to explain as coincidence. Ian Telfer, chairman of Uranium One, made donations totaling $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation. Those donations were funneled through a Canadian shell organization to conceal their origin, violating your ethics agreement with the Obama administration. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, which included your State Department, approved the Rosatom acquisition of Uranium One. Russia gained control of strategic American uranium resources. And throughout this process, Bill Clinton, your husband and foundation co-founder, received $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow from a Russian investment bank with ties to the Kremlin. A speech that occurred right in the middle of the Uranium One approval process. Bondi's voice carried the certainty of someone presenting airtight evidence. That's not debunked, Madam Secretary. That's documented. Russian interests paid your family millions of dollars in foundation donations and speaking fees while seeking and receiving approval for a deal that gave them control over American strategic resources. If that's not corruption, what is? If that's not pay-to-play, what would pay-to-play look like? The silence that followed was deafening. Even Clinton's attorneys seemed at a loss, whispering urgently among themselves, clearly recognizing that the Uranium One timeline was devastating in its implications. But the corruption of the Clinton Foundation goes far beyond specific deals, Bondi continued. Let's look at the foundation's actual charitable work, the humanitarian mission that supposedly justifies its existence. She clicked to a financial analysis prepared by independent auditors who had examined the foundation's tax returns and spending patterns. According to the foundation's own tax filings, less than 10% of the money it raised was actually distributed as charitable grants to other organizations doing on-the-ground humanitarian work. Less than 10%. The vast majority of the foundation's budget went to overhead, salaries, travel, consulting fees, and operational expenses. Bondi let that sink in. That's not how legitimate charities operate, Madam Secretary. Reputable nonprofit organizations typically spend 70–80% of their budgets on actual charitable programs and grants. The Clinton Foundation spent 10%. Where did the rest go? She clicked through expense reports that painted a picture of luxury masquerading as charity. First-class international travel for you and your family, justified as foundation business. Six-figure salaries for staffers who seem to spend more time managing your political network than doing humanitarian work. Consulting contracts for political operatives who help position you for your presidential campaigns. The Clinton Foundation wasn't really a charity. It was a political organization with nonprofit status, a way to maintain your global profile and donor network between campaigns while enjoying tax-exempt status. Bondi pulled up photographs from Clinton Foundation events, lavish galas in Manhattan ballrooms, celebrity-studded fundraisers, exclusive retreats at luxury resorts. This is what modern progressive charity looks like under the surface. Champagne fundraisers and designer gowns and A-list entertainment, all while claiming to fight poverty and inequality. The Clinton Foundation was a network maintenance operation for your political career, funded by foreign governments and corporations seeking influence, staffed by political operatives, and used to enrich your family while building the appearance of humanitarian concern. She turned back to Clinton, her expression one of barely restrained contempt. You want to talk about the most transparent charity in the world, then explain Haiti. The word landed like a bomb. Haiti. The Clinton Foundation's highest profile intervention, the project that was supposed to demonstrate the organization's commitment to helping the world's poorest, had instead become a symbol of everything wrong with elite humanitarian work. Promises broken, money misappropriated, local populations ignored, and wealthy donors enriched at the expense of desperate people. After the devastating 2010 earthquake, Bondi said, billions of dollars in international relief money flowed toward Haiti. Your husband Bill was appointed as a special UN envoy for Haiti reconstruction. The Clinton Foundation positioned itself at the center of relief efforts. And somehow, despite all that money and all that attention, Haiti remains desperately poor while Clinton Foundation donors made millions from reconstruction contracts. Bondi pulled up a series of contracts and financial records. The Overseas Private Investment Corporation, a U.S. government agency, provided financing for an industrial park in Haiti that was supposed to create thousands of jobs. The project was championed by you as Secretary of State and your husband through his foundation role. And who got the construction contracts? VCS Mining, a company owned by Clinton Foundation donor and your brother Tony Rodham. She let that relationship hang in the air. Your brother, a man with no experience in construction or mining or Haiti, somehow getting lucrative contracts for a reconstruction project that you were promoting through official diplomatic channels while your family foundation was raising money for Haitian relief. And when that industrial park was finished, it created a fraction of the jobs promised and did almost nothing to improve life for ordinary Haitians. Bondi clicked through photographs of the failed project, a sprawling facility that stood largely empty, surrounded by the poverty it had promised to alleviate. Haitians have a name for what happened to their country after the Clinton Foundation arrived. They call it the second disaster. The earthquake destroyed their infrastructure. The Clinton Foundation's intervention destroyed their hope. She read from testimony given by Haitian activists before a congressional committee. The Clintons came to Haiti with promises of rebuilding and partnership. What we got was a takeover. Decisions about our country's future were made in boardrooms in New York, not in consultation with Haitian communities. Contracts went to foreign corporations with Clinton connections, not to Haitian businesses. And when we protested, when we asked where the money was going, we were told to be grateful for the help we were receiving. Bondi looked up. Do you deny that your foundation turned Haitian suffering into an opportunity for your friends and family to profit? Clinton's response was cold, clipped, defensive. Our work in Haiti saved lives. We partnered with the Haitian government and international organizations to provide immediate relief and long-term reconstruction. Any suggestion that we exploited Haitian tragedy is offensive and false. It was perhaps the least convincing denial she'd offered all day, and Bondi pounced on it immediately. The Haitian people themselves are saying you exploited them, Madam Secretary. The contracts prove that foundation donors received preferential treatment. The outcomes show that despite billions in aid, Haiti remains mired in poverty, while Clinton-connected organizations made millions. Those aren't suggestions. Those are documented facts. Bondi closed her binder about the Clinton Foundation with a decisive snap. This organization that you call your proudest achievement, this supposedly transparent charity, was actually a money laundering operation for political influence. It took money from foreign governments seeking favorable treatment from the U.S. State Department. It accepted donations from corporations wanting regulatory relief or government contracts. It funneled money to your family members and political allies. And it did all of this while spending less than 10% of its budget on actual charitable grants, all while enjoying tax-exempt status and the appearance of humanitarian concern. She stared directly at Clinton. The Clinton Foundation wasn't a nonprofit, Madam Secretary. It was a business, and the product it sold was you. Access to you, favor from you, influence with you. Every foreign government that donated, every corporation that contributed, every wealthy individual who bought a table at a foundation gala, they weren't doing it out of charitable impulse. They were doing it because they wanted something from the U.S. government, and they knew that the way to get it was through your family foundation. Her voice rose with passionate conviction. That's not public service. That's corruption institutionalized, systematized, and normalized over decades until it became just the way the Clintons did business. Let's talk about the 2016 election, Bondi said, her voice taking on a new intensity. Let's talk about what you did when you lost. Because your failure to accept defeat, your decision to manufacture a conspiracy theory to explain your loss, your willingness to weaponize America's intelligence and law enforcement agencies to pursue that conspiracy theory, that might be your most destructive act of all. The screens behind her displayed a new set of documents, these ones marked with FBI and Department of Justice seals. Secretary Clinton, after you lost the election to Donald Trump, you and your campaign launched a coordinated effort to delegitimize his presidency. You claimed the election was stolen. You claimed there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. You spent years promoting these claims through friendly media outlets, through Democratic Party channels, through every avenue available to you. And the foundation of all these claims, the supposed evidence that justified them, was the Steele dossier. Bondi pulled out a copy of the dossier, its pages marked with highlighting and annotations. This document, compiled by Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer, contains some of the most salacious and outrageous allegations ever made about a presidential candidate. It claims Trump was compromised by Russian intelligence. It makes accusations so bizarre and unverifiable that even Steele himself admitted he couldn't confirm them. And yet, this document was used to obtain FISA warrants to spy on Trump campaign associates. It was leaked to media outlets to create a narrative of collusion. It was treated as legitimate intelligence when it was actually opposition research. And who paid for it? Secretary Clinton. Who funded the creation of this document? She pulled out financial records showing payments from the Clinton campaign. Your campaign paid for it. Through your law firm, Perkins Coie, you paid Fusion GPS to hire Christopher Steele to compile this dossier. You funded the creation of a document that would be used to justify a years-long investigation into your political opponent. You paid for the research that would tear the country apart for years, that would paralyze a presidency, that would lead to an impeachment based on allegations that were never proven. Clinton tried to maintain composure. Opposition research is a standard part of political campaigns. Every campaign does it. Not like this, Bondi shot back. Not by hearing foreign intelligence operatives to compile unverified allegations. Not by funneling that research to the FBI and media outlets while hiding your role in creating it. Not by using the apparatus of the federal government to pursue your political opponents. What you did wasn't opposition research. It was a conspiracy to defraud the American people and undermine a democratic election. Bondi displayed a timeline showing how the dossier was disseminated. Your campaign created the dossier and then orchestrated its distribution. You had operatives brief FBI officials. You had allies in the media receive copies. You had supporters in Congress demand investigations. And through it all, you pretended to have no knowledge of where this information was coming from. You went on television and talked about the serious allegations against Trump while knowing that you had paid for those allegations to be invented. The screens showed Clinton's television appearances where she discussed the Russia investigation. Her expressions of concern, carefully calibrated to suggest knowledge without admitting involvement. You knew it was opposition research that you had funded, Bondi said, but you let the American people believe it was legitimate intelligence. You let them believe that our intelligence agencies had independently discovered this information. You let them believe that there was real evidence of collusion when you knew, you had to know, that the dossier was unverified and likely false. The impact of this deception cannot be overstated, Bondi continued, her voice heavy with the weight of what she was describing. Because of the dossier you funded, America spent years investigating Russia collusion. A special counsel was appointed. Millions of taxpayer dollars were spent. The country was divided as never before. If this story of corruption exposed, justice served, and constitutional principles vindicated moved you, if it reminded you that accountability in government is not just possible but essential to preserving democracy, then I need you to do something right now. Smash that like button to tell the algorithm that this kind of content matters, that Americans care about holding their representatives accountable to constitutional standards. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss when we expose corruption and celebrate those brave enough to fight it. Share this video with everyone you know who still believes, or needs to believe again, that one person with courage and documentation can change history. Because the fight for ethical government never ends, the swamp is always there waiting to reclaim territory. And the only thing standing between accountability and corruption is an informed, engaged citizenry that refuses to let powerful officials operate above the law. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop demanding that your government serves you rather than enriching those who hold temporary power. This is not just history. It's a blueprint for every future battle against corruption. And your engagement ensures that the next generation of leaders understands that constitutional accountability is not optional, it's mandatory.